Welcome back, everyone. Time for us to go behind the headlines. We're taking a look at the fight for roadside marijuana detection technologies because as we've legalized marijuana in Washington and Colorado and look to do so in a few more states, oftentimes we hear the refrain of regulate marijuana like alcohol, treat it like alcohol. Now we're witnessing people saying, okay, we're going to treat it like alcohol. Where's the marijuana breathalyzer? And in fact, it may be on its way. A new study in the Journal of Clinical Chemistry that was entitled Cannabinoids in Exhaled Breath Following Controlled Administration of Smoked Cannabis found that someone who has smoked pot within a half hour to 2 hours will exhale measurable amounts of active THC. They tested 13 chronic pot smokers. They had positive breath tests 53 minutes after smoking a 6.8% THC joint. And over half of them were positive after 2 hours, but only one of them was positive after 4 hours. Among 11 infrequent tokers that they tested, 10 of them were positive within the hour, and 7 of them were still positive after 90 minutes. And this is a 6.8% THC joint. I've got some silver tip here from Brightside PDX that's 26% THC. So we'll just see how much we're exhaling after that. Now, these are preliminary experiments, and there are still some problems with this technology. First of all, the breath test for THC, unlike the alcohol breathalyzer, doesn't tell you how much THC is in the person's system. Then it wouldn't answer, whether or not you're over 5 nanograms in the case of Washington or Colorado, where they have that 5 nanogram limit. But it would be proof of violating a per se law. The per se, zero tolerance laws, that we have in over a dozen states like Idaho and Georgia and Iowa. So in any state, a future breathalyzer would probably also be enough reason for a cop to arrest you under suspicion of DUI and then take you in for the blood test. But also, coming soon, they might not even need to take you in. There's another technology in the works called a V-chip, and it's being developed by Lidong Qin and Ping Wang, 2 doctors out of Houston Methodist Research Institute. They just recently got $2.1 million in a grant from the National Institutes on Drug Abuse to develop a pocket-sized drug test about the size of a credit card for hospital emergency rooms with the goal of being fast, easy, and accurate. Now, this V-chip contains antibodies to about 50 different drugs and drug metabolites. You add a drop of blood, serum, urine, or any other body fluid to the chip, and then the drug metabolite binds to the antibodies, and it pushes this dye up these little channels, and it basically creates a visual bar graph of the substances detected. And tests so far show that it's accurate to the nanogram per milliliter level, which is exactly what you'd need for Washington and Colorado's 5 nanogram limit, or Nevada and Ohio's 2 nanogram limit, or Pennsylvania's 1 nanogram limit. And, of course, any of the zero tolerance states. Now, once the V-chip is perfected, it's not difficult to imagine that law enforcement will be clamoring for its use outside the emergency room and on the roadside. If there's a reliable technology to prove a driver's over 5 nanograms, there will be some political pressure to allow its use. Now, currently, to get a blood draw from a suspect still requires an arrest and a warrant because courts have found it's an invasive procedure to take your blood. But when the blood test is no longer going to have to be a needle stuck in your arm and taking out a full tube of it, and instead is going to be just like a little pinprick that you would get from one of those diabetes test meters, it's only going to be a matter of time before the courts start balancing that against the need to keep stone drivers off the road and deciding it's not that invasive after all, especially if it's already been determined through a breath test that you have active THC in your system. So, these roadside detection technologies are coming, folks, and the biggest problem with them isn't whether they're accurate, it's whether they're telling us anything useful at all. The reason alcohol breathalyzers work is because there is a dose-dependent relationship between how much alcohol is in your system and how impaired you're going to be. Yeah, there's exceptions for the petite girl or the obese alcoholic, but generally, the more you drink, the drunker you get. And you can tell if you drink X number of drinks over Y amount of time with Z amount of body weight, you're going to be too drunk. Marijuana doesn't work that way. Even the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration admits, quote, It is difficult to establish a relationship between a person's THC blood or plasma concentration and performance-impairing effects. Concentrations of parent drug and metabolite are very dependent on patterns of use as well as dose. It is inadvisable to try to predict effects based on blood THC concentrations alone. End quote. So all they're going to tell us with the breathalyzer or the V-chip is whether or not you've recently been using marijuana, not that that recent use of marijuana is actually impairing you. Now, the question will be, is that going to be enough? A lot of people would argue that it's irresponsible to get behind the wheel after you recently smoked, whether you're impaired or not. Think about this, people. When we come back, we'll have Herb Thrasher on the line for our Daily Toker Tunes. Stick around.
If he said he swam to China.